The year was 1895, and autumn had wrapped the Kentucky hills in gold and quiet mist. The town of Willow Creek sat hidden between rolling ridges and a slow, winding river. Life there was simple: sunrise to sunset, work to rest. Few strangers ever came down the narrow dirt road that led into town. But one evening, as the sky blushed orange and purple, a wagon appeared from the bend. Its wheels squeaked softly, the horse moved with weary grace, and a line of brass bells tied to its bridle jingled faintly in the dusk. Behind the reins sat a man dressed in a long, dust-worn coat. His hat shadowed kind, tired eyes, and his lips carried the ghost of a smile. The wooden wagon bore the faded words, "S. Boone, Traveling Goods and Honest Trade." Children playing near the well stopped to stare. Old Mr. Latham, who whittled wood on his porch, muttered, "Ain't seen a merchant in months. Let's see what this one's selling." The man tipped his hat as he passed. "Evenin', folks. Name's Silas Boone. Got wares and wonders for every home." There was something in his voice, calm, musical, the kind that could quiet barking dogs and soothe crying children. And just like that, the town that never expected visitors found itself waiting for morning. At Etta Mae's Inn, a small establishment by the creek, Silas tied his horse and stepped inside. Etta Mae, a woman in her late 40s with strong hands and kind eyes, looked up from wiping the counter. "Travelin' late, mister?" He smiled. "Travelin' always." "Been on the road near a month. Might I get a room and a meal, ma'am?" She nodded toward the back. "Got both. $2 if you want a bed soft enough to forget you're alone." As he ate stew by the fire, Etta watched him. There was something gentle about the man, mannered but not proud, weary but not bitter. He told her stories of small towns, fair trades, and children who paid him in drawings instead of coins. When she asked why he traveled so much, his eyes softened. "Because, ma'am," he said, stirring his stew, "the road's the only place left where a man can still make something right." That night, as the inn grew quiet, Silas sat by the window, looking out at the dark hills. From his pocket, he took a small frayed photograph of a woman and child. He whispered, "Just one more town, Mary. One more stop, and maybe you'll forgive me." Before dawn, Etta Mae went to check on her guest. The faint glow of lamplight leaked under his door, and she heard the creak of floorboards. Curiosity tugged at her. She peeked through the crack. Silas knelt by his open trunk. Inside were no stacks of money, no jewels, only small items: a child's ribbon, a silver locket, a pocket watch engraved with initials E.H. He held the watch in both hands and murmured softly, "I wasn't a good man, Mary, but maybe I can still be an honest one." Etta quietly shut the door, her heart stirred. She didn't understand what burden the man carried, but she knew he was a soul trying to make peace with something far behind him. The next morning, the square of Willow Creek buzzed like a fairground. Silas's wagon stood in the middle, draped in cloth, boxes, and gleaming goods: lanterns, combs, ribbons, knives, mirrors, even books, things the townsfolk rarely saw except in catalogs. "Step right up," Silas called cheerfully. "A bargain for every soul, and a story for every bargain." He traded a lantern to old Mr. Dalton for a sack of cornmeal. When the old man protested the unfair deal, Silas laughed. "I'd rather see your wife's kitchen bright than my purse heavy, sir." People smiled. They trusted him almost instantly. He spoke kindly, listened fully, and never haggled too hard. It wasn't just goods he traded, it was warmth. By afternoon, everyone in Willow Creek had something of Silas Boone's wagon in their hands. And as he packed up for the day, little Tommy Harker watched from behind a fence, barefoot, curious, and hopeful. Tommy was only 10, small for his age but sharp as a whip. His father drank, and his mother mended clothes for neighbors to keep food on the table. He'd never owned anything that truly felt his. When he saw the brass compass on Silas's table, his eyes lit up. It gleamed in the sun, the needle twitching as if it had a secret to tell. "How much for the compass, mister?" Tommy asked. Silas looked down, smiling gently. "How much you got, son?" Tommy emptied his pockets. 2 buttons, a pebble, and a single penny. "That ain't much," he said quietly. Silas leaned closer. "Then let's trade for something else. Hope. You got any?" The boy frowned. "Hope don't buy nothing." "On the contrary," Silas said, placing the compass in his palm. "Hope buys everything worth having." Tommy blinked, confused but thrilled. "Take care of it," Silas said. "That compass don't point north. It points toward what's true. You'll see." It was a small moment, but for the boy, it felt like the world had just handed him direction for the first time. That night, dark clouds gathered and the wind howled through the valley. Rain pattered against the inn's roof while lightning flashed across the hills. Etta May woke to the sound of voices outside. She crept to her window and saw Silas standing on the porch, talking to 3 men, Jed Crane, Harlan Tate, and Cole Briggs. They were known troublemakers, men who gambled, drank, and bullied. Jed's voice cut through the rain. "You've been flashing gold around, stranger." "Where's a man like you get coin like that?" Silas replied calmly. "From fair trade and long miles." Nothing more. Cole stepped closer, his tone low. "You'll be leaving soon, won't you?" Silas nodded. "By dawn, if the road allows." They laughed, a cold, mean sound that didn't belong in a town like Willow Creek. Then they walked off, muttering. Etta's heart tightened. She had seen that kind of greed before, and it never ended clean. In the morning, the sky was gray but calm. Silas came down for breakfast, his face pale and quiet. He handed Etta May a sealed envelope. "If anything happens to me," he said softly, "please give this to the sheriff." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You're fixin' to scare me." He smiled faintly. "No need for fear, ma'am. Just precaution. Trouble follows men who once made wrong turns." Etta studied him. "You talk like a preacher confessing instead of a man selling pots." He chuckled. "Maybe I'm both." Before leaving, he added, "You've been kind. Don't forget, kindness is the only trade that never cheats." Etta watched him go, feeling an ache in her chest she couldn't name. By noon, the sun had broken through the mist. Silas's wagon stood ready at the edge of town. He made his final rounds, delivering a mirror to the tailor's wife, a new knife to the blacksmith, and a spool of bright thread to a lonely widow. He refused money from most, saying only, "Consider it even for all the kindness you've shown." When Tommy came running with his compass around his neck, Silas knelt beside him. "You'll come back next year, won't you?" the boy asked. Silas looked toward the hills. "If the road brings me back, I will. But if not, you'll have my compass, and that's better than me." He tousled the boy's hair. "Remember, every good man's journey is never wasted, even if it ends too soon." Then he climbed into his wagon, tipped his hat, and disappeared into the forest road that wound along the creek. No one knew it would be the last they'd ever see of him alive. The next morning, a young fisherman spotted Silas's wagon near the creek bend. The wheels were half sunk in mud, one side cracked. The horse was gone. Inside the wagon, his goods were scattered. Lanterns broken, boxes overturned, one boot lying in the dirt. Sheriff Amos Clark rode out with a search party. They followed muddy footprints leading from the wagon into the woods, but halfway through the trail vanished. Only one thing remained behind in the grass: Silas's hat, stained dark with blood. The town buzzed with fear and rumors. Some said bandits took him. Others whispered the hills took their due. But the look in Etta Mae's eyes said what no one wanted to. She knew those three men from the porch had something to do with it. A week passed. Rain fell again, and the hills seemed to mourn. Etta Mae couldn't bear the silence anymore. She took the envelope Silas had given her and sat by the fire. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax seal. Inside was a folded letter and a document. The letter read, "If this reaches the sheriff, it means my journey's done. My true name is Eli Harper. Years ago, I was a banker in Tennessee, a greedy one. I ruined good families for profit, including my own. My wife and child left me, and I've spent every year since trying to return what I took. If I fall before I finish, let what's left of my earnings be used for the good of the people who treated me fair." Etta opened the second page, a land deed, signed in her name. It gave her ownership of a small farm near the creek. Tears filled her eyes. "Why me?" she whispered. And as thunder rolled outside, she could almost hear Silas's voice again. "Because kindness is the only trade that never cheats." When Sheriff Amos Clark read the letter Etta Mae handed him, his eyes widened. "Eli Harper," he muttered. "That name rings a bell. He used to be a banker down in Chattanooga. Man disappeared after his bank collapsed." Etta nodded, clutching the land deed. "He told me he wanted to make things right." That was all he ever said. Word spread fast. By sundown, the whole of Willow Creek gathered outside the inn. Some couldn't believe it. Others whispered that maybe he was an angel in disguise, sent to test their hearts. Sheriff Clark stood on the porch and said, "What matters now is justice. A man don't vanish for no reason, not in my town." But even as he said it, the hills stayed silent, heavy with secrets. And deep down, every soul in Willow Creek felt the same uneasy truth. Eli Harper, Silas Boone, had come not just to sell, but to settle a final debt. Three men stopped showing up at the tavern. Jed Crane, Harlan Tate, and Cole Briggs kept to themselves, jittery and pale. Jed's hands shook when he tried to light his pipe. Harlan avoided the creek road entirely. And Cole, the youngest, began drinking before noon, muttering to himself about a face in the water. Rumors grew. Children said they saw a man walking by the river at night, carrying a lantern that glowed green. Dogs howled when the wind came from the west. One night, the church bell rang on its own, though no one pulled the rope. The townsfolk gathered, whispering, "The merchant's ghost won't rest. He's looking for something." By morning, Cole Briggs had vanished. His house stood open, his boots by the bed, and muddy footprints led straight toward the creek. Little Tommy Harker couldn't sleep. He'd been clutching his brass compass every night, hoping it would lead him to a sign, something to tell him the merchant was okay. One misty morning, he followed it down the narrow trail to the creek bend where the wagon had been found. The compass needle spun wildly, then stopped, pointing toward an old hollow willow tree. Tommy crept closer. Inside the hollow, he found a small leather pouch wrapped in cloth. He opened it. Inside were silver coins and a folded note written in that same neat, slanted hand. "For the boy who believed. Use this to make your road straight. The compass will never fail you because it carries truth, not direction." Tears filled the boy's eyes. He ran back to town shouting, "He ain't gone. He left something for me." The townsfolk gathered around him, some crossing themselves, others smiling through disbelief. Etta Mae just whispered, "Bless him. Even in death, he's still given." That evening, the tavern door burst open. Harlan Tate stumbled inside, soaked in sweat, eyes wild. He slammed his hands on the counter and cried, "It was us! God forgive me! It was us!" The room fell silent. Harlan's voice cracked. "We just wanted his gold. We followed him when he left town. Thought we'd scare him, take a few coins, didn't mean to hurt him." He buried his face in his hands. He fought back, slipped by the creek, hit his head. Current took him before we could pull him out. Sheriff Clark stood, jaw tight. Who's we? Harlan's shoulders trembled. Jed and Cole. But Cole's gone. I reckon the hills took him for what we did. The sheriff locked him in the cell and rode out immediately, searching the woods for the others. But the hills had already answered. 3 days later, the sheriff's search party returned. The air was thick with the smell of rain and the sound of crows. Down by the river bend, tangled among the roots of an ancient willow, they found him. Eli Harper, the man once known as Silas Boone. He looked strangely peaceful, hands folded across his chest, clutching that same worn photograph of his wife and child. His eyes were closed, face calm, as if the river had carried him to the forgiveness he sought. They pulled him gently from the water. The sheriff removed his hat and whispered, "Rest easy, traveler. You paid your debt." When they carried him back to town, every bell in Willow Creek tolled. No one asked for justice anymore. They knew justice had already been delivered by the hills themselves. They buried him on a grassy hill overlooking the creek he'd loved so much. The sun broke through the clouds that morning, painting the valley gold. Etta Mae placed wildflowers on his grave and whispered, "You gave more than you ever owed." Tommy laid his compass beside the cross. "You said it points to what's true." "I think it pointed me to you." The preacher's voice trembled as he spoke. He came a stranger, but left a lesson, that a man's worth ain't in his fortune, but in what he sets right before the end. And when the wind blew through the valley, it carried with it a faint jingle, like wagon bells fading into the distance. Months passed. Winter turned to spring, and life in Willow Creek found its rhythm again. Etta Mae used the land deed Eli left her to build something new, a small inn by the creek. She called it the Traveler's Rest. It wasn't fancy, but every traveler who passed through got a warm meal and a story about a merchant who believed kindness was better than gold. Tommy used the coins Eli had left him to apprentice with the town's blacksmith. Within a few years, he opened his own forge under a wooden sign that read, "Eli's Way Ironworks, honest work, honest pay." Whenever someone asked about the name, Tommy would smile and say, "It belonged to a man who taught me what honesty means." One bright spring morning, Etta Mae received a letter sealed in blue wax. The handwriting was careful, elegant, written by a woman's hand. It read, "My name is Mary Harper. Years ago, my husband Eli left home to make peace with his past. I never knew where he went, only that he carried our photograph and promised to send word when his road was done. If you know anything of him, please write me back." Etta read the words twice, then sat down by the window. Outside, the hills were green again, the air alive with birdsong. She took out a sheet of paper and wrote one simple sentence. "He found peace here, and he gave it to us too." Then she folded the letter with care and sealed it with a pressed wildflower, the kind that grew by his grave. Years later, people still swore they saw strange lights on stormy nights. Travelers passing through Willow Creek told stories of a lone lantern moving through the fog, sometimes along the ridge, sometimes down by the river. Those who followed it claimed it led them safely through the storm, guiding them back to the road when they were lost. Old-timers would smile and say, "That ain't no ghost, it's just the merchant making sure folks don't lose their way like he once did." Tommy, now grown with children of his own, never denied it. When his son asked if it was true, he'd simply say, "Some journeys don't end, son. They just change direction." And sometimes, late at night, he'd hear it. The faint, familiar jingle of wagon bells drifting through the hills. By the time Tommy grew old and gray, Willow Creek had changed. There were more houses, a new church, even a telegraph line running through town, But one thing never changed: the story. Every Sunday evening, Tommy would sit on the porch of the Travelers' Rest Inn and tell it to the children. The tale of the merchant who gave more than he took, who sought forgiveness not with words but with deeds. He'd end the story the same way every time. Sometimes a man's last journey isn't about where he goes, it's about what he leaves behind. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, the children would swear they could hear the distant sound of a wagon creaking down the road, the bells chiming soft and steady, as if Eli Harper was still traveling, still trading in kindness, forever bound to the hills that finally gave him peace.